we set out to inform people about the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And I think we've already accomplished that even before we get started with this conference, with this press conference. I'm Charles Powell, and I'm president of the Donald and Sally Alice Thompson chapter of Veterans for Peace. Veterans for Peace is a national, actually international organization. We have chapters in England, Vietnam, and Ireland, and others are being developed. So we're an international organization. We're mainly military veterans that have served in times of war and times of peace, and we've concluded that weapons and violence is not the answer to the world's problems. And often is the cause of the world's problems. So with our mission to abolish nuclear weapons, to stop war as a national policy, then it's quite natural for us to support the Kellogg-Briand Pact. It falls right under our mission. Veterans for Peace has chapters, over 100 chapters around the country, well, around the world. And we are committed to educating people about the terrible costs of war. And recently, we took on educating people about the Briand Peace Pact that was signed in 1928. But we ran into some elected officials and some members of the media that somehow didn't think that world peace was a local issue. So just briefly, it is a local issue partly because the same mindset that leads to international conflict also leads to criminal and gang violence in our communities, domestic violence in our homes, bullying in our schools. Another way that it's a local issue is that so much of our resources are spent on weapons and violence that we're always short when it comes to education, health care, housing, and other people needs. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Again, welcome. Thanks so much for coming. And I hope you'll be able to stay for the whole program. Sorry for starting late. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Charles. My name is Ray Garduño. I'm president of the City Council, and I was happy to be the person to present a proclamation to the Veterans for Peace folks. Sally Alice was there, and so was Charles Powell, to accept the proclamation. One of the real interesting things about that is that we worked on it and made sure that it didn't offend anyone, made sure that we spoke about not supporting war in a way that those that believe in war would accept it. I'm just kidding. Because, as Edwin Starr said, good God, What is war good for? Absolutely nothing. You know, it's always it's a pleasure, but it's also an honor, and I'm humbled that folks thought to ask me to say a few words and to introduce the folks that are going to be talking about peace. We're going to reference war, no doubt, just as a juxtaposition. But I don't want anybody to think that because we're using the word war, that it's certainly on my part, that there's any adherence to that, that there's any positive part of that word. And I was glad to know that when the doves were released, what a beautiful thing that was. But I was so glad that Dick Cheney wasn't here. Or else we'd be missing some doves now. It's really one of those things where you need to know that this is throughout. The whole country knows about this. And I want to thank, at this point, Michelle Grisham was not able to, Representative Michelle Grisham was not able to join us today, but Alexandra Bassan is here. Thank you for representing the office. And Tom Udall, who's been a peacenik forever, has also asked Bill Woolman to join us. Thank you, Bill. It speaks volumes when you're able to intergovernmentally talk to each other about these things. Talk about how important it is that we talk about peace. That we talk about peace as if it's not only possible, but necessary and something we should work for. I was also glad that about 4 years ago, I presented a resolution that was passed by the council to support the Department of Peace. Interestingly, though, there were 5 councilors that signed it and 4 did not support it. I don't know what that says, but I guess it means that they don't want peace as part of the discussion. The proclamation that I referenced or referred to was, again, something that talks about the Kellogg-Briand Pact and how important that was. And it still is. And it still is the law of the land. Let's not forget that. Again, we made a little bit of inroads. We had 7 councilors sign that and 2 that didn't. I don't have a copy of it, or else I'd show you. And it's unfortunate, because all that does is it continues that silly partisan nonsense that happens when you talk about government. It continues that adversarial hatred that we feel because we don't agree with someone else on everything. And we don't have to, but we have to be respectful of what other people think, and why anybody would refuse to sign something that speaks to the very core of who we should be as human beings, as civilized folks. It's just unfortunate. I talk about it, I don't dwell on it. It's not worth it. It's not worth my time, especially since I only had 3 months to go. But it's one of those things that, you know, we need to make sure that when we elect folks, that they listen, first of all. So I'm here to listen. I wanted to make sure, I was going to read the proclamation, and unfortunately, we don't have a copy of it. It's been sent to the Library of Congress, and I think they're putting it in the archives there. So we didn't get a chance to get a copy. And making time, because I asked Julian in my office to send me a copy, and it's still loading. So I think we may have to go on without reading that proclamation. First of all, let me tell you that we did have, unfortunately, two folks that were not able to join us. Bishop David Cooper of New Hope Gospel Baptist Church was not able to join us this afternoon. And also Sila Wat Bahaton of New Mexico had an emergency and is also not able to join us this afternoon, but we do have three great representatives of the clergy who will be with us this afternoon and will be part of the panel. First, let me just introduce, and I'll introduce all of them right away, and then they can go to the panel discussion at that point. Father Frank Quintana, the Blessed Oscar Romero Catholic Community, Rabbi Harry Rosenfeld from Temple Albert, and Imam Shafi, Islamic Center of New Mexico. You can applaud. I want to thank them for being here and to show that peace is not the domain of any one of us or any thought or any religion. Really, it is a human condition. And without peace, all there is turmoil. And who wants that? I'll turn it over, and if you'd like to start, Father Frank. And I think you could just speak from the table if you'd like.
Thank you. Like each of you, I am grieved by any report of a terrorist attack or of any act of violence that makes the news feed. They take place continually around the globe. Particularly, of course, what is grievous to us are the terrorist attacks. This month, we marked the 70th anniversaries of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What more horrific event of terrorism exists than that? And so I am equally upset by the ongoing U.S. or U.S.-sponsored terrorist attacks on Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, and elsewhere. My heart breaks with every report of the hundreds of nameless, non-combatant people who are called collateral damage. How dehumanizing. I am heartbroken every time I hear of these people who die from our bombs, our weapons, our soldiers. So why should we be surprised when individuals or hundreds or thousands or one day millions of people turn against the United States, NATO, or other first world powers in acts of terrorism? What do we expect when we have shown only hostility to the world's poor, when we have practiced genocide against people in Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, Darfur, Haiti, and elsewhere? Why are people who espouse peace but practice violence, Americans, most government officials, even church people, why are they so upset about these terrorist attacks when we ourselves support terrorism upon sisters and brothers elsewhere on the planet? For me, then, the question how to stop terrorism is easy. We stop terrorism first of all by stopping our own terrorism. We cannot fight terrorism by becoming terrorists. We cannot end terrorism by using the methods of terrorism to bomb and kill, to occupy others' lands, to support the terrorist occupation of the Palestinians, and to hold the world hostage with our nuclear weapons. And in fact, sometimes I think Rather than calling us New Mexico, calling ourselves New Mexico, we should call ourselves Nuclear Mexico. Presently, the U.S. is militarily engaged in Afghanistan, Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, Kyrgyzstan, Lebanon, Oman, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, UAE, the United Arab Emirates, Uzbekistan, and Yemen. And some people say even that we're actually militarily engaged around the world in 134 conflicts. So we must bring the troops home, unequivocally. Our legislators must support the Iran nuclear deal. We must support and fund diplomatic, nonviolent, and democratic peacemaking initiatives around the globe. We must support and promote the United Nations nonviolent peacemaking solutions. We must end world hunger immediately. We must cut all U.S. military aid everywhere, dismantle every one of our nuclear weapons, fund jobs, education, and health care at home and abroad, clean up the environment, and teach nonviolence to everyone around the world, beginning at home in every U.S. classroom. With the degree of excessive and wasteful military spending, we have the capacity and wealth to do so. If we stop raping and exploiting the earth and her resources, if we stop hoarding the wealth and using violence to protect that wealth, if we extend ourselves in humanitarian action instead of military action, can you imagine the goodwill we would earn around the world rather than the hatred and ill will that we are presently engendering? Thank you.
Thank you, Father. Go ahead if you're ready.
Should I be introduced? Okay, so
Welcome.
I want to start by sending a greeting of peace. A greeting of peace that brings three of us together. Shalom, Salem, Salam. Peace.
Peace.
And so may peace of God be with you.
And
May
also-
peace of God be with the world. May God bless America, Mexico, Guatemala, Uganda, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Japan, Korea. May peace of God prevail. I want to represent religion first, because I understand that prophets and messengers were never violent. They preached the message of peace. They guided people to God. They fought against every evil. They promoted peace, stability, security, even to those who are not adherent of their faith. They had a provision for them. So they were messengers and ambassadors of peace. And somebody may say, but if we read Talmud or Old Testament, New and Quran, we find that prophets waged war. They fought. Yes, they fought. But they never came to a community and killed them. They preached. They preached peace. They promoted patience and tolerance. They promoted unity, love, and forgiveness. Until when persecuted and oppressed, having negotiated and negotiated and negotiated, God the Almighty commanded them to defend themselves. That does not make them violent. and that agrees with any law in the world. It means that war was the last attempt to solve after negotiation and negotiation and negotiation, and this is contrary to what is happening today by some Jewish, by some Christians, by some Muslims, by some non-religious individuals or groups. War has become the priority. War has become, we are warmongers. We promote war. We drink war. We eat war. We dream war. We sleep war. Everything in our mind is war, war, war. And this has never, ever done good to any one of us. I think I'm the youngest of my colleagues. But I want to remind those who might have participated in the Second World War. Being in America today, as a country, our presence, our violent presence, is in not less than 37 nations. It is estimated, and this is not my area, that we have killed no less than between 20 to 30 million souls, and we are still killing. And the rest of the world, knowing that we are the superpower, and the superpower has to be followed and imitated, they realize that they have to follow the suit. And so war and violence is everywhere in the world. I wish and hope that we condemn war approach, weapon laundering, terrorism promotion, to creating better understanding, compassion, love, universal reconciliation, understanding that regardless of your faith, regardless of your background, regardless of your ethnicity, the world has become a village. And if someone is dying now in Kashmir, you are not safe. And if someone is dying in America, any king in Saudi Arabia is not safe. And if someone is dying in Israel or Palestine, do not be proud of yourself that they are dying and I am not. This is the concept of terrorism, fundamentalism. It is this. And so we want to go for stability, peace, and security for all. And may God change our hearts towards loving one another, towards tolerating one another, towards being patient with one another for a common cause of better, peaceful, and amicable life in this world, because everybody has a right to live. May peace prevail to the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Imam. Rabbi, please.
Oh, I'll just slide over. First of all, I want to make it clear that I did not move over here because I did not want to sit between my two esteemed colleagues, but the light from the projector was blinding me, and it seemed to be an easier solution than making war on the projector. Or the person running it. In this week's Torah portion that was read, this past week's Torah portion that was read on this past Shabbat, Saturday, around the world in every Jewish synagogue, from the book of Deuteronomy, it says that before one wages war on a city, one has to offer peace. It's a concept that we too often forget, and part of the canard that talks about and that portrays the Hebrew Bible as one filled with violence. As my colleagues have indicated, and particularly the Imam, war should be the very, very last resort, and that should only be in self-defense. 10 years ago, when I turned 50, which now tells you how old I am, I won't take that long, I promise. I keep getting flashed these numbers about how long we have. I just sat there and went online and started in 1955, the year I was born, and counted up the number of weeks, which became months, which became years, that United States troops were not actively involved in battle. Declared war or not. And in these past 10 years, there hasn't been a break, obviously. When I did that addition, so now in the past 60 years, the United States has been at war has not been at war for just over 3 years and 6 months. I'll let you do the math the other way, but I prefer to phrase it that way. That includes things like Grenada, Nicaragua. I mean, really, what was the purpose of Grenada? I mean, seriously. And so it's that perspective that we don't talk about. Not every war is evil, and sometimes war, sadly, is necessary to confront pure evil. We saw that in World War II, particularly in Europe. I wouldn't be able to be sitting here today, the Imam wouldn't be able to be sitting here today if the Allies hadn't won. If Nazism had won, large numbers of people in this room would be dead. And not from war, but from the kind of so-called peace that would have been imposed. That kind of evil in the world really is the exception. And I think it behooves all of us that for however many years any of us have left, that we increase that 3.5-year number exponentially. And we work to do so.
Thank you very much, the panel. I did have the opportunity to ask Julian in my office to send us a copy of the proclamation, so I am going to read it. It's not very long. It's 13 pages long. No.
I have 10 minutes left. It's just...
No, it's a very short proclamation. The Council of the City of Albuquerque, whereas the Kellogg-Briand Pact was an agreement to outlaw war signed on August 27th in 1928, some 87 years ago, and subsequently became the law of the land by virtue of the United States ratifying it as a treaty by a vote of 85-1, unheard of these days, and ratified by the President on January 17th, 1929, announcing war as an instrument of national policy. Whereas the treaty established the important point that only wars of aggression, not military acts of self-defense, would be covered, which I think was a mistake, my opinion. Whereas 62 nations agreed that war was outlawed as an instrument of national policy, in that signatories settled the disputes by peaceful means, and whereas progress in technology has made war even more vicious and has included the likelihood of nuclear holocaust, and whereas the emphasis on aggressions as a means for dealing with differences promotes a culture of violence and killing, and whereas a peaceful world, a world that does not rely on military aggression as the method of resolving international differences, will benefit the citizens of all the world and the citizens of Albuquerque economically and emotionally. Whereas the City of Albuquerque encourages all citizens on this anniversary date of August 27th to rededicate their commitment to nonviolence as the path to resolving international disputes. Be it proclaimed that the council, the governing body of the city of Albuquerque, hereby recognizes August 27th as the rededication to the Kellogg-Briand Treaty Day. And that was done, thank you. And that was commemorating, again, not to dwell on war, but to wage peace. So with that, I'd like to now introduce our speaker, Ray McGovern, who has been working in the area of peace, justice for a long time. I had the opportunity to meet Ray McGovern about 3.5 years ago, when we held the Pentagon of Peace. And it was coincident with, I think I mentioned, some legislation that I was able to present to the council supporting a Department of Peace, which some people thought was silly. Some people thought, you know, how can the city of Albuquerque be talking about national issues? Well, if people don't realize it, we're part of the nation. So we get a chance to speak to those items. Ray has also worked very closely. In fact, he leads the Speaking Truth to Power, which is a section of the Tell the Word, a publishing arm of the Ecumenical Church of the Savior in Inner City, Washington. A former co-director of the Servant Leadership School, he has been teaching there for 20 years. His current course is Biblical Justice. Is it an un-American activity? Ray came from his native Bronx to Washington in the early 60s and then joined the CIA as an analyst and there worked for 27 years. He has, again, many pages of accolades and things that he's done, but I'm going to leave it to the fact that he's a great speaker and I'd rather hear him than me read. Ray McGovern. Herb wants to say a few words. Herb.
One, if there are members of the press who have not identified themselves, we have seats up front for you. And secondly, this is a free event of the Veterans for Peace sponsorship. We will pass the hat. If you're so inclined, please make a donation to help defray the expenses we've incurred in this event. Thank you, welcome, and my good friend Ray.
Ray just asked me what I had up my sleeve. I caught on that. Is this working okay? Yeah. I was reminded of a priest friend of mine, young fellow who's saying his first Mass. Really bright fellow. He had a homily or a sermon that wouldn't quit. And, you know, he was all set, prepared, and he got up to the microphone, and he thought it wasn't on. Now, he was speaking to a very live community. They knew all the responses. Forever and ever, amen. Lord be with you, and also with you. Okay. So he didn't know what to do, so he tapped that thing. It didn't seem thing. He said, there's something wrong with this damn thing. And also with you was the immediate response. So we can do without immediate responses today. But I do want to say peace, shalom, salem, salam. I also want to give a hat tip to David Swanson. who is pretty much single-handedly responsible for our knowing about the Kellogg-Briand Pact and are observing it. He and Kathy Kelly, whom some of you know, are giving an equivalent lecture or whatever in Chicago as we speak. So David has written a lot of books. This is one, War is a Lie, and it is. And I want to quote just a sentence or two about the Kellogg-Briand Pact because it says it very succinctly. As you have already heard, it condemns and renounces war as an instrument of policy. And this Secretary of State, Frank Kellogg, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize the next year, 1929. And when I learned that, I was thinking about our sitting president, who also, in a hilariously undeserved manner, also won the Nobel Peace Prize, but his speech was not about peace. His speech was about what conditions we could have a so-called just war, which, my friends, is an anachronism. So he not only that, but lately he's bragged about how many wars he's been in, you know. How many, what did he say? I think 7? Was that it? Yeah, I did 7 wars. I'm doing 7 wars. Hello, we've come a long way in 87 years, haven't we? And not in the right direction. So why do we continue wars? Why do they go on? Well, first and foremost, war is good for business. I mean, let's face it. I mean, peace is not good for business. Tension, war, really good for business. I mean, you take what's happened in the Ukraine. There is a French-German consortium that was building the common European battle tank, and they were dead in the water because they had they had no real enemy. But once Ukraine became a hot issue, man, their stock went up, and guess what? Maffei and its French counterpart are building now the common European battle tank. That's just one little example here. Good for business? Well, you know, it's seldom so clear how good for business wars are as when we give, for example, $5 billion or so to the Iraqi military, and we send our crackerjack officers like Petraeus out to train them, and they come back and say, we have crackerjack 300,000 Iraqi army people. And then this time last year, somebody from ISIS, or the Islamic State, takes a couple pot shots at them with an AK-47, and what did they do? Run. They ran away, yeah. Well, I exaggerate. Not all of them ran away. The officers took helicopters out of the area, okay? Now, why do I mention that? Well, I mention that because they left all these fancy weaponry that we gave them behind them, okay? I mean, a lot of it, tanks, you know, armored Humvees, artillery. So we couldn't let, you know, ISIL did get some of it, but we couldn't let them get as much as they could. So what do we do? Well, we destroyed it. Oh, you got the U.S. Air Force, was really good about just breaking up things in there to destroy most of this $5 billion worth of stuff that we gave to the Iraqis. And now, how are the Iraqis being equipped? Oh, so another $4 billion worth of stuff. I mean, this, if it weren't so sad, it would be comical, but that's how it works. That's how it works. Now, how is this enabled? Well, it's enabled by the media. You know, look at some of the major media, not only the cable channels, but the broadcast media. Who are they owned by? They're owned by the corporations who profiteer. I don't say profit, I say profiteer in these wars. Now, look at NBC, for example. You know, how much of their business, you know, how much of their small business is devoted to their media operation? Well, you know, you talk about GE. GE makes a lot of stuff, right? A lot of war stuff. So when you look at the corporations that own the media, you realize that maybe 5% of their attention is given to the media, And in that respect, the media is really obliged to abide by the strictures that make war profitable, that make tension go up, and bring back profits to the corporations that own them. Now, there's a premium on truth here, and what's really, really difficult is that you don't get it from the media. The fourth estate, so-called, is dead. That's the bad news. You can't get the straight story from the mainstream media. You can't. So, is that all there is? No, no, there's a fifth estate. Where's the fifth estate? Anybody know? I don't know where the ether is. Anybody know where the ether is? But I know that if I want real news, I can tune into Amy Goodman in the morning and find out what's going to happen. So what's going on. Very often, I learn first what's going on from Amy Goodman, and then 11 o'clock when I get a call from Al Jazeera or RT, something, you know, I say, oh yeah, I know all about that, because I watched Amy. So, you know, Martin Luther King Jr., one of my heroes, addressed this problem when he talked about oppression. He talked about the lack of truth and injustice. And what he said was, he compared the situation to a boil. He said, like a boil that can never be cured unless it's opened up with all the pus-flowing ugliness that brings to the natural medicines of air and light. So too injustice must be exposed with all the friction its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. That's what we have to do, folks. We have to become knowledgeable about what's going on, and we have to tell all our friends. And if no one will listen, then we have to put our bodies into it, as you know, people did 230 years before us, and make sure that our democracy is kept, and that when Ben Franklin told that lady that he had created a republic for us, if we could keep it, we have to do something now to keep it. Already mentioned was the notion that we spend an awful lot of money on arms, and as most of you know, half of our discretionary spending goes to what we call defense, but which is really what I just described: building arms, selling arms, and getting the congressional people get the stuff behind the back. They get elected, and they appropriate more money for arms, and the arms can. So you see how it works. Half. Now, how many of your neighbors know that? How many of your neighbors know that half of their tax dollars, the ones that don't go into Social Security and stuff like that, go into war? We spend as much as all the other countries in the world put together. Now, not only that, but what did the last audit of the Pentagon show? You're right. Hey, you guys are really good. There's no audit. The Pentagon does not get audited. Yeah, in the back there.
Toronto announced on September 10th that they had $2.3 trillion of unaccounted spending.
That's exactly right. Man, this is a great audience. You took my next line. There was incredible corruption. There's incredible waste, and nobody checks on it. So, you know, we talk about opportunity costs. Well, that's a nice, you know, nice highfalutin word to say that we could use this money in much more constructive ways. I'm thinking about 35 years ago. Some of you will remember, we didn't have a big homelessness problem. We didn't have a lot of mentally ill people out in the street. We didn't have near as much poverty as we have now. We didn't have people getting into trouble so the police would shoot them up. We didn't have the kind of situation that put a fellow like James Boyd in jeopardy for his life. So this is relatively new in terms of our country's history. Now, Dr. King talked about militarism. He talked about racism, and he talked about you know, the kind of materialism that we're all subjected to. I think I've talked enough about the militarism and how it works with the military-industrial congressional complex. And some of you probably don't know that that's what Eisenhower intended to call it, the military-industrial congressional complex, all right? He was dissuaded that people couldn't take congressional. Well, you got to take congressional now because it's true. What you have now is the military-industrial congressional media, security services, corporate complex. And you know, folks, without exaggerating one little iota, that's very close to the definition that Mussolini gave to, guess what? Fascism, yeah. So, I want to explore the issue of racism. And I brought a video which some kind folks here have been really good to download. And Robbie, could you show this video before I introduce it? Some of you will remember the fellow who stars at the end. It's only 5 minutes, so if you fall asleep, you're going to miss the end, and there's a quiz on it at the very end. This goes back to Vietnam, and it will bring back some memories to some of you who have a touch of gray in your hair, as I do, or lack hair, as I will soon lack hair. So take a look at it, and then let's talk about what one of these main aspects is. Not only militarism and materialism, but also racism, which I think is appropriately called America's original sin.
Many bombs, many coffins. These are for children. 800 or 900 a week. I have lost 7 children myself. Many have died here. Though it's nothing like in the countryside, many more have died there. In the countryside, there are no coffins. There's no money to buy them.
How did all the children die?
Poison. Poison, you know. These planes keep spouting and spraying the stuff, and so many people have died. It seems to destroy their intestines. With this spraying and bombing, so many have died. Each day, right on time, the bomb craters appear. Hundreds of tons are dropped each day. And we can't talk about it. We can't talk about it because we are afraid of the government.
It can be described much like a singer doing an aria, you know, that's totally into what he's doing, you know, totally feeling it. He knows the aria, and he's experiencing the aria, and he knows his limits, and he knows whether he's doing it and doing it well. Flying an aircraft can be a great deal like that.
What's a race driver feel like? Why does a guy want to drive an Indianapolis 500 and go charging around there? I guess perhaps the risk of dying, being killed, is part of it that makes it thrilling.
I can tell when the aircraft feels just right. I can tell when it's about to stall. I can tell when I can't pull another fraction of a pound, or the airplane will stall, flip out, and spin on me. I would follow a little pathway on something like a TV screen in front of me that would direct me right, left, or center. Follow the steering, keep the steering symbol centered. I'd see a little attack light when we stepped into attack. I could pull the commit switch on my stick, and the computer took over. computer figured out the ballistics, the airspeed, the slant range, and dropped the bombs when we got to the appropriate point, in whichever kind of attack we'd selected, whether it be flying straight and level or tossing our bombs out. So it was very much of a technical expertise thing. I was a good pilot. You know, I had a lot of pride in my ability to fly.
Well, the Oriental doesn't put the same high price on life as does the Westerner. Life is plentiful, life is cheap in the Orient. And as the philosophy of the Orient expresses it, life is not important.
The commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, General William Westmoreland, who was crooked as the day is old, who falsified the numbers on the enemy, and who was just about to get 206,000 more troops to put into the battle when whistleblowers blew the whistle, gave information to the New York Times, and LBJ told his friends 2 weeks later, I would have given Westy the 206,000 folks, but now we can't do it. Those damn New York Times articles have done it, so I'm going to have to cool this thing down, go to negotiations, stop the bombing, and I'm not going to run for president in November. We're talking March 1968. So this was very consequential stuff. Now, where does Westmoreland hail from? Anybody know? South Carolina, right, okay. Now, with all due respect for any of you who are from South Carolina, that's where Jimmy Burns hailed from. Anybody know who Jimmy Burns is? Yeah. Yeah, he was almost going to be vice president, but even he couldn't be on the ticket because he was such a blatant racist, okay? Now, why do I mention Jimmy Burns? Because that's, you got it, man. You guys are good. Because he dropped the bomb. He was responsible almost single-handedly for persuading President Truman that they needed to kill a whole bunch of Japanese. Now, how do I say that? Well, the documents show the Japanese were just about to surrender. We had their codes broken. We knew months in advance that all we needed to do was to say, we're not going to hang Hirohito, okay? We're not going to disrespect him. You can keep Hirohito, and will you surrender now? And they would have. We knew that, okay? But Jimmy Burns, he said, now, President Truman, if you do that, the American people will never forgive you. I'll leave Hirohito in power, okay? So what I'm saying here is that Truman himself, of course, was a bigot from the day one. He always used the N-word, referring to African Americans. And so it didn't take much to persuade Truman. But Eisenhower, MacArthur, Admiral Leahy, all the top brass, except one, of the 5 stars on active duty at that time, opposed it, and so did 80% of the scientists who built the bomb. They said, don't do this over people, do it as a demonstration if you must. And Einstein said that this was his most profound regret for his whole life. So what I'm saying here is that when you demonize people, like we did the Japanese, now, you have to acknowledge that they did a lot to let themselves be demonized. But still, you know, now when we rounded up Japanese on the West Coast and put them in the equivalent of, you know, nice if you could say nice concentration camps, Do you know that about 75% of those were American citizens? And did we do the same to the Germans? No, why? The Germans look like us, like most of us, you know? So this is really, I mean, what did Truman say? Well, Truman said 500,000 people are going to be killed if we try to invade Japan, okay? And so I had to drop the bomb. Well, that's a lie. The JCS study said a very small percentage of 500,000, maybe 100,000 would perish, okay? But the idea was just say you can have Hirohito, which in the end, MacArthur said, all right, you can have Hirohito, all right? We're not going to string them up. And it would have been done. So, you know, in terms of interring the Japanese Americans, J. Edgar Hoover was against it. Can you imagine? Yeah, he said, we don't need to do this. I got my guys all over the West Coast. We don't need to do this. So that's how bad racism. Now, you know about gooks, right? And you know about slopes, and you know about camel jockeys, and you know about towel heads and all that kind of stuff. You demonize people, and then you can do whatever you want to do to them. Or even demonizing people like Vladimir Putin now. Demonize, demonize, demonize. It's sort of the American way of life. So, what'll I say is also lacking? Well, one of the people that I have come to respect a lot is a fellow named Hans-Peter Kolvenbach, who is the head of the Jesuit order back three decades ago. And he wrote that there's no substitute for personal experience with innocent suffering. He said personal experience with innocent suffering serves as a catalyst for reflection and then hopefully action toward justice. And he was right on about that. I don't think he had a whole lot of experience with personal suffering, innocent suffering himself, but he knew that as a truth. And one of the people who was actually responsible for the golden rule, the wonderful catch that those very courageous folks and Veterans for Peace sailed out into Honolulu and tried to get out into the Marshall Islands while the testing was going on around 1958. He said this: how do you reach people when the horror is in the fact that they feel no horror? You know? And the media, again, is largely responsible for that. So, not only need we be concerned about war and the toll it takes on people less fortunate than we, the personal suffering that we can avoid very easily if we avoid learning about it, but we're talking about what happens, as James Madison warned us, what happens when perpetual war comes, and he said it was the most significant threat to civil liberties. And he had that in spades. Think about the Patriot Act, so-called, and all that kind of thing. Now that's really important, folks, because those things are now in place. We have a National Defense Authorization Act that allows the U.S. military to come in here and take me away from the podium and put me in Guantanamo or anywhere else they choose. It's not forever, just until there are no terrorists left in the world. Just until I kid you not, that's what the language, just until the end of the war on terrorism, okay? So what we should be reminded of what some Germans thought and said back in 1933 after the Reichstag, the burning of the German parliament. That was their 9/11, or vice versa. Our 9/11 was that. And after that, the stringent infringements on civil liberties were really quite remarkable. And one person who was there was a young lawyer, and he commented on this. It's one sentence. He said, his name is Sebastian Hafner, and he did his own little diary of those days in Berlin, 1933, and subsequent years. He fled to London. There are few things as odd as the calm, superior indifference with which I and those like me watched the beginnings of the Nazi Revolution in Germany as if from a box in the theater. So, we have faith traditions represented here today, a common Abrahamic tradition, and I'd like to cite one of my prophets, Abraham Heschel, who said, "Indifference to evil is worse than perpetrating evil itself." We are not all guilty, but we are all responsible. That's a big, heavy burden. But you know, we need to pick it up and run with it. And for those who have a little touch of gray in their hair like I do, you have a big advantage, okay? Big advantage, because Americans don't like to see old guys beaten up, okay? Young people, they got it coming to them, you know. Now, I learned that personally because when Hillary Clinton's, well, the folks where she was speaking beat me up pretty bad, and it got out that a 71-year-old gentleman was beat up bad. She got thousands and thousands of emails and telephone calls, partly due to my friends in Veterans for Peace. I had this big Veterans for Peace shirt on, spreading the word around. So I kid you not, you know, they're not going to kill you, I don't think. They're not going to break your arm or anything. But, you know, if you get out there, I think the younger people in this country need good example. And if they see how strongly you feel about it, well, maybe they'll follow that good example. So even though we're not all guilty, we are all responsible, I think we have to figure out exactly what we're called to do, where our particular passion and talents and experience intersect with a need in our country. Do it preferably with a small group of 3 or 4 other people who are really simpatico. Decide what to do and do it, okay? Now, there's one caution, I would say. The purpose of a small group, of course, is that you meet together once a week, right? And you get to know each other really, really well. And then, when one of you or 2 of you decide, well, you'll do an action, well, then you have support from the others, and you have accountability. If McGovern says, I'm going to go see my senator this week, well, the following week, McGovern knows that his nice colleagues will say, well, how did it go, Ray? How'd you go with your senator? So I'm much more likely to do it, right? Okay. Now, the thing I'd warn against is twofold. One is success. One of my favorite parts of Les Miserables, the book, is where Bishop Bienvenu, the good bishop that tells the cops that he gave the candlesticks to Jean Valjean, he didn't steal them. Anyhow, he's described in the book as a really nothing. He has no future in the church. He doesn't do all the required things. He cares about the people, and he doesn't look up to be an archbishop. And then Hugo comments. He says, success is an ugly term because far too often people confuse it with merit. Oh, good. Usually people just kind of look at me blank. Well, think about that, So, what's my point? We're not called to be successful. We're called to be faithful. And my Daniel Berrigan, I think was mentioned before, he's a friend, and he's 91 now, and he doesn't have long to live, I don't think, but he's still as bright as can be. And he tells a story in his autobiography, which is called To Dwell in Peace, and I recommend it to everyone. He tells a story about after the big demonstration in Catonsville, Maryland, 1968. There were about 9 Catholic agitators, so to speak, for peace. They burned draft cards with their homemade napalm. They were wrapped up and brought to the only federal building in Catonsville, which was the post office. So they're sitting around, and it's kind of and Dan says what's going through his mind. He said, I knew this was a big event. I knew that this was a major action. And I kept asking myself, was it worth it? What would be achieved here? And as I pieced through this, I said to myself, you know, the good is worth doing because it's good. Now, success is not unimportant, but it's secondary. The goodness of the act speaks for itself. Now, little did he know that he was sort of the precursor for all manner of demonstrations which finally got us out of that god-awful war, okay? But that was his attitude. So that's number one. Success is not unimportant. And too many Americans that I've talked to, you know, it may be a typically American trait. You know, you don't want to start on a major action or project without having a reasonable degree of certainty that you'll be successful, right? I mean, who wants to be laughed at? You know, what's it say, Ray? What'd you think you were doing by standing up there with Hillary Clinton? You know, that kind. Well, you know, that's the wrong way to look at it. Success is not paramount. The other thing is, well, it's just illustrated by what Dan says next in his autobiography. He says, just then, now Dan is a poet, of course. You know, he has a way of, he's great. So he says, just then, a jet-jawed paradigm of an FBI inspector comes into the post office, kicks open the door, right? And he looks at my brother Phil, also a priest, and he says, "You again? I'm going to change my religion." And Dan says, "No higher compliment could ever come to my brother Phil." You know? So the lesson here, you got to keep your sense of humor. This is heavy stuff, especially if you're going to do it for the long haul. So that's why you need a small little community, hold each other accountable, support each other, but remind each other that, you know, you're not in charge of this thing. You know, you're not in charge of the world, and that's probably a good thing. You know, probably a good thing. So let me just finish here with a quote. Maybe it's from fitting that it would be from Dan Berrigan. Where did I get this quote? Well, I was staying at the Catholic Worker in the Bowery in New York. Kathy Kelly. You know, she was off somewhere, and I was able to use the room that and there on the wall was a poem, and it was one of Dan's poems, and it was written in limited edition, I think 50 copies, and one of them he gave to Kathy Kelly, okay? And I looked at it, and I read it, and I said, I better copy that down, because I'm not going to get it any other ways. This is what it said. It talks about some. Some stood up once and sat down. Some walked a mile and walked away. Some stood up twice, then sat down. I've had it, they said. Some walked 2 miles, then walked away. It's too much, they cried. Some stood and stood and stood. They were taken for fools. They were taken for having been taken in. Some walked and walked and walked. They walked the earth, they walked the waters, they walked the air. Why do you stand, they were asked, and why do you walk? Because of the children, they said. Because of the heart, and because of the bread. Because the cause is the heart's beat, and the children born, and the risen bread. Thank you very much.
There will be an opportunity. There will be an opportunity to ask questions from the audience. We have a microphone set up. You could line up. But first, if there are any press here, any media people, come down front if you'd like to ask Ray some questions.
Yeah.
Also, while this is, and then we'll have a reception in a little while. I'd like to recognize the members of the committee who put this program together. Sally Alice Thompson, Charles Powell, Ravi Radwani, Will Colbert, I saw him here a moment ago, and Monique Salib, who is not here at the moment. Thank you.
We'd like to thank Mike Swick and Sue Skerman for their help today also.
Thank you. Ray, it's your program. Which Ray? Oh, I don't know. R-A-Y.
And Herb Hoffman, our leader.
Yes.
Well, I hope you notice how popular I am with the media, how they swarmed down here to ask me questions. I guess it's not much different in Albuquerque as it is in Washington, so well, I'm not surprised. But Will, the first question.
Yeah. A number of years ago, your friend and mentor, Daniel Berrigan, at a conference in Kirkridge Retreat Center in Bangor, Pennsylvania, made the following statement. Said, nonviolence is not only the way we win, it's the only way we can win. And then he said, and besides, they have all the tanks. I don't even have one. His sense of humor. Would you comment on the fact? Is that the only way we can win?
Yeah. Well, it is. And Ken, why don't you talk about that wonderful book that you were citing the other day, because it really kind of says chapter and verse.
As some of you know, there was a national conference on campaign nonviolence up in Santa Fe last week. And one of the speakers was Erica Chenoweth. She's written a book called Why Nonviolence Works, or Why Nonviolent Resistance Works. She studied 300 instances, and they were very rigorous about that, 300 instances of resistance to regimes. And their criteria for being included in the study was it had to be an instance in which a regime was removed or a colonial occupier was removed. Since the year 1900, between 1900 and 2006, there were roughly 300 such instances. Nonviolent resistance was successful twice as often as violent resistance was. And her book goes into hypotheses of why nonviolence is more successful than violence. You can see her talk on YouTube. If you go to Campaign Nonviolence website, they have all of the presentations from the conference on the website. They have a link to her presentation, which was 58 minutes long. She has a delightful manner, so that even though the subject was heavy manner, she did a beautiful job on it. I'd encourage you to look at it. I'd encourage you to get the book.
Thanks, Ken. Another question? Here comes one.
Hi, I'm Bill Pratt. I'm the local liaison for the American NGO Coalition for the International Criminal Court. It seems to me that the International Criminal Court is a nonviolent method to deal with international violence. Unfortunately, there is aggression. There are terrorists. For whatever reason, there are war crimes committed by people. And currently and in the past, they've generally acted with impunity. Do you have any feeling about considering the International Criminal Court as a nonviolent approach to dealing with violent individuals?
I think it's an excellent forum for that. My problem is that unless you're an African dictator, you seem to be immune. Now, Tony Blair would be my chief nominee for bringing up before that court. He participated with George Bush in planning and executing what Nuremberg called a war of aggression. And they spelled it out. This is the definition they gave it. To wage a war of aggression is to commit the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only in as much as it contains the accumulated evil of the whole. Accumulated evil of the whole? Think torture, think kidnapping, think black prisons, think having your phones and your laptops monitored every stroke. Think about all those things and you've got accumulated evil. Tony Blair as my prime candidate, and the only reason that I wouldn't put Bush with him is because Bush very artfully ducked out of joining the ICC, even though Clinton almost, or someone, yeah, I guess it was Clinton, almost got us in that body. So thanks for your comment. I think it is a nonviolent, legal way to handle these kinds of war crimes, and do not blanch before the word. These are out and out war crimes.
I think you're right, and U.S. officials are able to operate with impunity because we're not a member. I think that I'd encourage the members of this audience to encourage their congressional participants to have us join the International Criminal Court.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be another avenue.
Mm-hmm. Hear, hear. We've met, I think.
Yes, I've
You've
met.
interviewed me.
Yes, that's right.
100 years ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. When you had you weren't quite as gray.
What is your name?
My name's Simon Polikovsky.
Simon, right.
And I have a favor to ask of you.
Sure.
I have here a book called The Pentagon's New Map, War and Peace in the 21st Century, Thomas P.M. Barnett. And I'd like to read the back who this Mr. Thomas P. Barnett is. He is a senior strategic researcher and professor at the U.S. Naval War College. From October 2001 to June 2003, he served as an assistant for Strategic Futures, Office of Force Transformation, Office of the Secretary of Defense. Before that, he directed the New Rules Sets project in partnership with Cantor Fitzgerald. He's been called, Esquire named him the strategist of the year, like in 2000, or the best and the brightest in March 2003. And I like to quote from his book, and I'm going to ask you a favor. I don't travel very much, and you travel around, and maybe you would run into Mr. Barnett here. This is from the preface of the book, and it says here on page 7, thanks to 9/11 and the two wars it has so far spawned, Americans now understand there is no great power like the United States. Instead, we have to begin to see the world for what it truly is, divided into societies that are actively integrating themselves into globalization's functioning core, and those that remain trapped in its non-integrating gap. And see, you're preaching to the choir here. If you ever get a chance, I'd like for you to ask these people, what do you this isn't a terrorist saying, hey, cheering 9/11 like we saw on September 12th. This is a policy strategist, a man who teaches at the War College. Yeah. And why aren't people asking him these questions? What do you mean about this, thanks to these wars that have been spawned from these incidents?
Well, they stay behind their protective institutes, their think tanks. Unless we go to them, and often we're not allowed in, there's no debate. 99% of the people on CNN, Fox News, they're of this stripe. And I have to say that if his logic is followed through, and we keep building more arms, and we forget about why they hate us, why they really hate us, then we're never going to make it. Why they hate us. I have a little analogy that sometimes I use, and it's about defeating terrorism, and I use the analogy of defeating malaria. Now, with malaria, what do? You find the mosquitoes, and you track them back to the swamp where they breed, and you find the swamp, right? And then you station 2 platoons of sharpshooters around the swamp, and you try to shoot the mosquitoes as they leave the swamp, right? Wrong. Wrong. What do? You drain the swamp. And what's the illusion here? The swamp of grievances that we, the United States, have cultivated by our support for the dictators in the Middle East and by our bragging about there being no daylight between our policies and those of the State of Israel. You want to incur hate? That's a good way to do it. So what we need to do is drain the swamp, and yet when people ask, Helen Thomas, one of her last press conferences, she asked John Brennan, who's now the CIA, she says, you talk a lot about terrorism, but you never tell us why. And Brennan said, well, it's because they are Islamists and because they destroyed Islam and they really, he pretty much said they're hardwired at birth. They come out of the birth canal saying, I hate America, I really hate America, that's what he pretty much said. And she said, yeah, but you still haven't told us why. He said, well, it's a complicated thing. So she said, it's religion? No, that's just religion, but it's too complicated. Next question, okay? Nobody knows. Well, they don't even take the trouble to find out why. And that's really noxious. That's why we have to spread the word around as to why. I guess we're up for the next one.
Hi there, my name is Maggie Shepard. I'm a reporter with the Journal. The media is here.
Hi, Maggie.
Hey.
Thanks for coming.
I'm happy to do my job. The talk you gave today covered a lot of really heavy, like you said, burdensome responsibilities for our communities. If you were to pick one and give me a sentence to drop into the minds of people who read my story, what rises to the top? What's the most important or pressing of those that you brought up today?
Well, I think that the business of the out-of-control military spending is the most important.
I'm going to sit while I do this. I can take notes.
I'm sorry? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just, when I said there was no homelessness to speak of, well, before Ronald Reagan, that was true. I mean, you talk to kids in those days, homeless? What does that mean, And then, of course, you have a lot of mentally ill people out there. And, well, you know that in Albuquerque, what happens when people are poor and they're mentally ill or they have no place to go. They go up on a mountain and they get shot by the cops. I mean, this is really so symptomatic of problems throughout the country. So once people realize that, yeah, it's really nice to have Sandia Labs here. I mean, that's really terrific. But the notion that we're spending billions of dollars on second-generation new ICBMs that we don't need, why do we need them? The Russians don't have them. But now the Russians will have them. I mean, is this a great country or what? So the military-industrial complex is the key here. And they get all the money, not only from the Pentagon, of course, but from the Department of Energy here in Sandia. I've been inside there, I used to be inside this kind of milieu. And the notion that instead of doing what John Kennedy started in instituting the limited test ban treaty with Khrushchev, instead of going down that path, instead of what Ronald Reagan almost accepted from Gorbachev at Reykjavik in the mid-'80s, when Gorbachev said, let's get rid of nuclear weapons. And Reagan went to his folks and said, that sounds good to me. And they said, no, we have to build an anti-ballistic missile system. Now, the anti-ballistic missile system is the biggest, what should we call it, corporate welfare program that ever has been devised in the history of man. The scientists say, the engineers say, it'll never work. You can always figure out some decoys, you can always defeat it, okay? And yet billions and billions of dollars have been sunk into that. And the worrisome thing is that now we're building anti-missile defenses around Europe and into the Black Sea and into the Baltic Sea. And what are they supposed to be for? Oh, to knock down Iranian missiles with nuclear weapons. But the Iranians don't have nuclear weapons. They're not going to work on them. They haven't been working on them since 2003, according to the US intelligence community. And so, oh, yeah, but Korea, we need to defend against Korea. Of course it's for the Russians, you know? The Russians know that. And why is this important? Because if the Russians get the idea that our generals think that they can defeat the ICBMs in Russia at a first strike, then they're on a hair trigger. Then there's no warning. You know, as soon as they see something suspicious going up, we have reason to fear what I feared as a young man. It's come back. The nuclear, the shelters will, you know, invest in nuclear shelters if this thing goes on in Ukraine. So that would be my suggestion, that once we realize that the needs of Americans should supersede the needs of the military-industrial complex, well, there are ways to do this. I was talking with Ken the other night. You know, you can tell a big corporation that's building tanks, look, we'll give you 3 years. Build buses, build trains, build something that we can use, okay? You have 3 years to do it. And don't fire anybody during those 3 years. But after 3 years, you have to have a viable product that you're producing, and it can't be a weapon. It's easy. Well, it's not easy as pie because of the entrenched power of all these people with money. But there are viable alternatives to it. And why we don't even talk about those, why they're sort of off the media chart, is symptomatic of the interest that the media itself has in deference to their corporate sponsors, that really look at them as a sort of an ancillary little business on the side, as long as they don't cause any trouble to us and we keep selling arms and so forth, we're in good shape. That's a long-winded answer, but that's how I would look at it. Thank you. 2 more questions, I'm told. Maybe 3, since we have 3 up there.
My name is Don Schrader, and
Hey, Don.
I thank you for your strong message for peace. I have paid no federal income tax, not a damn penny, for war for 36 years. And Kathy Kelly is a friend who has inspired me, and many people have inspired me. My question is, when you were a CIA analyst, what helped you? Who helped you? Who inspired you to wake up, to change? And was it a long evolution? I mean, were you considering it for years until you made the leap to be a peace activist?
I get this question very often, and it's always a disappointment to the audience. I never fell off my horse, right? I didn't change. The Central Intelligence Agency changed. I was recruited with the notion that I could speak truth to power, that I could tell the president unpleasant things, and I would have career protection for doing that. And that was the deal. That was the deal, and I did that. These blue-suited generals in Vietnam, these guys, you know, saying, hey, Mr. President, we have these big B-52 things, and we drop big bombs, and we're going to seal off the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Truman, or in this case, LBJ, would come to us, what do you guys think of that? And we would very gently say, well, Mr. President, the Ho Chi Minh Trail doesn't look anything like I-81 or I-95 or the 5 in California. You can't even see most of it from the air. It's 161 trails, so yeah, you could drop all the bombs you want, and you might even kill a lot of people, but we know Ho Chi Minh too. We brought him into Hanoi at the end of the war. He's not going to give up. And nobody gives up on the just bombing. So if you want to send, 500,000 folks there, you're still not going to be able to do it. So all I'm saying here is that the promise was made to me to tell the truth, was honored until the very end when Bobby Gates and Bill Casey started to fool around with my colleagues and appointed people who were more careerists than honest people. And that's why you had the fraud before Iraq. Do not let anyone tell you that this was a big mistake, that the intelligence was mistaken with respect to Iraq. It was fraud. It was out and out fraud. And it pains me to this day that my colleagues, my former colleagues, participated in that fraud on the American people and the American Congress, cheating them out of their constitutional prerogative to declare or otherwise authorize war. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than that, okay? So that's, if you want to say I fell off my horse, that's why I fell off my horse, but that was the CIA turning into a servant of aggressive war. And I couldn't abide that, and some of my friends got together, and we've been writing and speaking and traveling around ever since to try to spread some truth around about what's really going on.
Hi, I'm Rosemary Blanchard, and I belong to so many different organizations. I won't give you a laundry list, but I have taught at the university level in the area of peace and conflict and human rights. And I am currently retired in what seems to be a career in fostering human rights education in the K-12 schools. My experience is, I mean, I look around, we have a lot of gray hair here. And being social beings, if things do not, we learn things not by instinct, but by teaching and learning. In my experience, when I would teach students about the Nuremberg principles, and these are college students, and teach them about the principles of human rights, even that the US has ratified. Teach them about Kellogg-Briand. I put that in the class once. What I inevitably heard from almost everybody was, how come I got clear to college and I never heard this before? And I think we have a real question to ask ourselves about that. Why are even the positive parts of American history that deal with promoting human rights, upholding, establishing some of the principles of international humanitarian law, et cetera, totally outside of anything our children learn in school? They are part of our domestic civics, they are part of global civics. And so I'd like your thoughts about how to work with our admittedly troubled school systems nationally to be sure that children learn their own history when it comes, and the world's history, and the world's governance when it comes to human rights, humanitarian law, and the like. And just to put in a plug, if anybody goes to the website of the National Council for the Social Studies and clicks on resources and on position statements, you will find that the National Council for the Social Studies agrees with me and has a position statement saying that civics and social studies require the teaching of human rights and humanitarian law. So what I'm asking you is, how is it so absent? How can we make it more present?
I wish I had a good answer for that, but as the Germans would say, jetzt bin ich überfragt. Now I am over-asked. All I can say is do your part, all of you. A lot of my Veterans for Peace friends are out there in the high schools, spreading word about what recruitment is really like and that kind of thing. But it's the historians, it's the social studies teachers. Now, I have 9 grandchildren. I've been checking up on what they're learning, okay? And I asked, we had a family thing, and there were some from Oakland, and there were some from Virginia, and one from North Carolina. And I asked them all, why did we drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And 3 out of 5 said, well, to spare American lives, because there would be hundreds and hundreds. The president said 500,000 people would be killed, right? And people at Oakland both said, that's a crock. The war was won. They were ready to celebrate. It was not necessary. And the general said that. And I said, whoa, wait a second, they're learning the real deal in Oakland. The idea is to spread that around. It should be available, and teachers should not be hemmed into saying anything other. So I don't know how you do that with teachers, but it really is. You point out a real dilemma, and it really is necessary to do something to bring them up to date on these things.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Last question, real quick question. One of the things I talk about is that if you don't want a weapon used against you, don't develop it. Do you think the United States is safer with the development? We know about atomic weapons, but do you think we're safer because of our development of drones?
No. There are two big things that changing the game, and everyone seems to be oblivious to. Why? Because there's a lot of money in building drones. We're selling drones all over the world. You know, drones good. You know, drones are good. Make money. Well, anybody can get a drone. I mean, drones. I remember when they started. Well, they only cost $1 million each. You know, I don't know why drones aren't shot down more often. Are there any Air Force people here that can explain that to me? I mean, they're sitting ducks as far as I can see, but the attitude is, well, they only cost $1 million, so if they get shot down, nobody gets killed. See? No Americans get killed. You know? Isn't that great? Yeah. So that's one thing. So drones, yeah, drones are a real game changer. But the big game changer, and this is sort of volunteered as a personal judgment, is cyber war. Now, we used to be the predominant military country in the world because we're the only one that spends so much money, and so we build aircraft carriers, and we build these big ships, and we build all these other stuff. And guess what? It's not going to take building these things anymore. What it's going to take is educating young people in cyber. And for all the people we have, the Chinese have about 10 times as many people learning about cyber. And so, guess what, folks? I'm afraid that the next time the balloon goes up, let's say in the Gulf, Persian Gulf, our aircraft carriers are going to find, oh, wait a second, there's some glitch in the system. The system is down. Send somebody from the Pentagon. We can't launch the fighter bombers. You know, well, this is really strange. All it takes is some really smart people to screw up these things. Look how hacking is so easy. So I'm of the opinion that the game is changing very, very quickly, though we're still building aircraft carriers because there's lots of money in that for the contractors and for the congressmen who have districts and who get the money in the back pocket. But, you know, 10 years from now, when the drones are all over the place and we can't really depend on even our F-35s that cost billions and billions of dollars to fly because somebody's hacking their control system, you know, that's going to level the playing field to a great degree. Take that for what it's worth. It's my personal opinion. Thanks very much for your attention. It's been fun being with you.
Thank you, Ray, and all the participants. We do have some refreshments off to my left, your right, and we can please stay and mingle for a while. I draw your attention to the sign up here, which gives the website for accessing the Kellogg-Briand Pact.